minute you start feeling sorry for someone, that is much worse than being angry with them.
Sienna, has he overdone the "I'm just a plucky son of a toolmaker," or actually, the more you say it, does eventually it just stick in people's heads, and it's not the worst thing to have in people's heads?
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst thing. I mean, a similar thing happened with Sadiq Khan when he was always saying "son of a bus driver," and it became a sort of running joke that Sadiq, son of a bus driver, every single time, and now Keir Starmer, son of a toolmaker, which unfortunately can make some jokes out of that particular claim, but I don't think it's a bad thing. If it's this classic thing of Labour people always think, well, the Tories are really, really good at repeating the same slogan over and over, like long-term economic plan, something like that. And that's usually for kind of, broader political vision rather than just your background. But if you repeat it enough, all of us will be completely sick of it. We've heard it 1,000 times before, but hopefully the general public have only heard it up to 5 or 10 times before, and then they'll remember it. But they're not in that cycle of listening to this stuff every single day.
Yeah, and if someone hears it for the first time, the 5,000th time he said it, then it's kind of worked, hasn't it? I guess. Ed, do you think Starmer's had a good campaign, or has he had just a not bad campaign? And if this person is going to be given the keys to Downing Street, the keys to the country for potentially years and years and years with a supermajority, is just simply being not bad good enough?
Oh, that's a big philosophical question. I feel like it's a sort of examination for all souls. I think he's had a not bad campaign rather than a good campaign. I don't think the country is rising up with enthusiasm about a Keir Starmer premiership. They're rising up against 14 years of Tory rule and the last 5 to 8 years of complete sort of chaos since the Brexit referendum. But I've always had this theory that I think Keir Starmer will be a better prime minister than a leader of the opposition. I think he may surprise us. I could be completely wrong about that. I thought Rishi Sunak was going to be a brilliant prime minister. And I think he may well earn himself 2 terms in office as a result. I think people are crying out for stability, calmness, reassurance. And there is every chance that Keir Starmer could offer that to people. I thought he did well in the Sky debate. He was certainly much more energetic than he was in the previous BBC debate or ITV debate. I can't remember which one it was. I think it's fairly obvious that he's going to win this election now. But he's winning it. You're absolutely right behind your question. He's winning it on the fact that people don't want the Tories to be in power, not they want Keir Starmer.
You're a very political animal, Ed Vaizey, by any standards. What do you make of the whole Corbyn thing? That he mentioned Corbyn himself when he accused the Tory manifesto of being like Corbyn. And then yesterday, what he said to Beth Rigby, and our listeners are very split on this. Some people think this doesn't matter. Some people really think it matters an awful lot. But the notion that he was campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 because he knew Corbyn couldn't win seems to be totally mad. And either someone admitting to lying to an electorate for a 4-year period for their own political benefit. And that might matter, but maybe it doesn't matter enough to make any difference to the truck that is the Labour Party heading towards the election. What do you think of the whole Corbyn thing? Is it irrelevant, or does it speak to something broader?
Look, first of all, he's telling the truth. It's no doubt at all that a lot of people who stayed on board the Labour ship under Corbyn did so on the basis that they didn't think Corbyn was going to win the election, or if they did think he was going to win the election, they could somehow, new to his impact, perhaps even get rid of him once Labour had won an election. And that's why they held their noses and stayed on board. So he's telling the truth, but it's a good example of sometimes why you shouldn't necessarily tell the truth in politics, because it was an utterly cynical thing to do. And it was, to be blunt with you, a sort of cost-benefit analysis. Do you keep the Labour Party together long enough for there to be something to salvage?
Yeah.
Or do you kind of all leave because Corbyn is the leader? And Starmer has taken that gamble. Starmer knows, and the Labour Party knows, that for the last 3 or 4 years, the biggest impediment to them getting back into power was Jeremy Corbyn, the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn. And it is, in some ways, a remarkable achievement that Keir Starmer could well be Prime Minister, considering the depths to which Jeremy Corbyn took them. But Starmer is being brutally honest, and you're quite right, it will divide public opinion. Some people will say, as they always do about MPs and politicians, you're just in it for yourself, you're not independent, you don't speak your mind, you basically lied to us, which he kind of did. Or they will say, yep, we get it, we understand why you did that, and in any event, it's irrelevant because we're going to vote for you to get the Tories out.
Yeah, and I guess just final on this point, Sienna, mainstream Labour, which you're very close to, just wants him to give Corbyn a kicking the whole time because that's what's going to get elected. So maybe it doesn't matter that he lied for all those years because he's being honest now.
Well, the advantage of this sort of story is they'll say it emphasizes that he changed the party, which is something that he's clearly achieved on his own term, a great success. He dropped his leadership pledges. So during that leadership campaign, he did pitch to the left. He was saying he was, Corbyn without the baggage, more electable, but same sort of policies. Yeah. And now he's saying, he supported Corbyn for PM, but didn't believe it at the time. Obviously, the disadvantage is that's pretty awkward. He's saying that he was lying in 2019. And Pat McFadden and others have gone on the radio this morning and said, well, we all were, because every kind of centrist Labour MP basically was lying in 2019, and we had to, because we thought we could save the party afterwards. We were staying and fighting. The problem is, even in this election, the anti-politics sentiment is so high, and that is something that focus groups, it's coming out of them, it's coming out of everyone who's on the doors at the moment that I speak to. They're saying just that anti-politics sentiment, which comes out in Green votes and Reform votes, and that will hit Labour in certain constituencies, not enough to really affect the kind of majority Labour is expected to get, but it's something that is quite important, if not to the actual election result, then just to our country and our discourse.
Yeah.
You've been getting in touch about this. The audience's response, says Richard, to the toolmaker bit struck me as quite odd. JL Partners found that only 10% of people knew about Starmer's background. Maybe this was a more news-engaged audience than the rest of the country. I think that's true. Another one here, Keir Starmer has not had as many gaffes as Rishi Sunak, which helps. So we're going to talk about Rishi Sunak now. What have we learnt about him during the past 3 weeks? He didn't have a Sky dish. Beth Rigby asked the Prime Minister if there were any facts he could share with us that would endear us to him. She actually said, make us like him again. Here was his answer.
I was talking to someone today and they're genuinely surprised about the amount of Haribos, Twixes and everything else that I get through, particularly during a campaign. So contrary to popular belief, I don't have that healthier lifestyle or diet.
Okay, a sugar fiend.
It's a very difficult question, Ed Vaizey. Tell us something about you that's going to make us like you, brackets, again. So it's very loaded. But what did you think of his response? And is there a better response to that question, do you think?
Well, it goes back to all the son of a toolmaker stuff. I mean, this attempt by people who are frankly weird, and I include myself in that category, people who go into politics trying to make themselves appear normal to the great British public. Normal people aren't that interested in politics and get on with their lives. If I had been Rishi Sunak, I would have returned to the dishwasher stacking. I think that is rather endearing.
Yes.
That he is obsessed about how you stack a dishwasher, sorry. He could have basically said, yeah, I'm just slightly weird, I'm afraid. And I do wish politicians would talk normally, and I was kind of willing Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak on to talk normally in yesterday's debate. When people are talking about, fiscal events, you just think, no one talks about a fiscal event in the pub. Why can't you talk normally about the kind of policies you want to pursue and kind of talk it through? I was willing Rishi Sunak, when the small boats came up, to say, look, this is the situation, because he'll have all this inside knowledge. He could have explained what is going on. Why are the Vietnamese suddenly coming to the UK? What are the kind of things he is doing that normal people would understand? Because he did sort of communicate how difficult that issue was. So I thought using the sugar tactic was not necessarily sensible. It's a sort of D-Day-esque in the sense the government is banging on about healthy eating. And, George Oswald had a sugar tax. And suddenly the Prime Minister says, no problem. Stuff your face with Twixes and carry on.
Yeah, it's making me hungry. Sienna, what did you make of his performance last night? If you read the sketches that have been written about it and some of the tweets by the journalists who were there seems to be a kind of feeling of that the show's kind of moved on from Rishi Sunak, that he's become a bit fringe, really, and that there's a lot of focus on Keir Starmer, presumably because of the polls. And that Rishi Sunak is kind of fading into the margins, into irrelevance. Is that how it felt to you, or actually did he still have any kind of presence?
No, I think that is how it felt. I mean, obviously, the fact that the Conservatives have been on the airwaves this week saying, "Oh, our main priority and your main priority should be just to kind of limit that supermajority that Labour is going to get," that obviously gives the impression that the election is done, and they're kind of trying to say that because in some ways that might help them. But yeah, it did seem like the show's kind of moved on. I mean, it's interesting to sort of think back to during COVID. Everyone seemed quite impressed by Rishi then. He seemed very clear in his communication, quite straightforward next to Boris Johnson, whose communication style is impressive at times, but really didn't suit the pandemic. And that's when he kind of built up all this capital that then led him to becoming prime minister. And then since then, he's got this tetchy Rishi sort of reputation. And I think sometimes he is in danger of giving this impression that he's very clever and we're not quite clever enough to keep up with him and agree with him on his policies. And that is a real danger. He comes across as awkward, defensive, and actually just not enjoying it. And you can understand why he's not enjoying it. But the thing about Boris Johnson is that he always looked like he was having a great time.
Lisa says, ask a ridiculous question. That's the one about tell us something that might make us like you. Expect a ridiculous answer. I'm not going to vote for someone based on the number of times they've visited a supermarket. Yeah. The election is Labour's to lose and it feels like a done deal. Ed Vaizey, I want to ask you about some of the decisions around Rishi Sunak, because there's a suspicion that he's perhaps not being well advised. Gito Hari was on pretty much saying that yesterday on the programme. Not just the D-Day stuff, although that's the kind of the biggest one and the one that has really kind of cut through, to use a cliche. But it's just, maybe he just can't do this stuff. You know, he can't go and speak to a crowd of Welsh people and say, yeah, are you excited about the Euros? He can't go into a school classroom and say, are you excited about your exams? The answer to all these questions is no, Rishi. What do you think? Is he surrounding himself with the wrong people? Should they change tack a little bit, or is it pointless?
I don't want to blame his advisors. It ultimately comes from the person in charge. And I had massive hopes for Rishi Sunak. I was really wanted him to become prime minister. I thought he would be brilliant because I thought he would have the kind of attention to detail and the kind of long-term commitment to really make a difference and kind of big, strong kind of principles that he was going to follow through on. And he has disappointed me. And at the end of the day, you know, I always used to say this about David Cameron. You know, people will agree with me or not agree with me, but being prime minister is a really, really difficult job. And the D-Day point makes that, because you have to do the day job, which is handling policy, but you also have to do, as it were, the inverted commas royal job of being at events and being approachable and doing that stuff. I thought David Cameron did that very well, but you didn't know he was going to do it well until he became prime minister. And we've now found out that because Rishi has become prime minister, frankly, he just doesn't do it well. It doesn't fit him well. It's not what, you know, he would have been, if he'd carried on as Chancellor of the Exchequer with a high profile, charismatic prime minister, he would have been, I think, a very effective chancellor. I mean, oddly, even though Jeremy Hunt is equally deeply odd, he might have, maybe if they swapped jobs, the Tories would have had a better chance.
That's interesting. Just lastly on this, Fran says, I don't think people dislike Rishi. It's just that he doesn't have the political skills to cut through. We feel sorry for him. Well, let us know if you agree with that or disagree.
And yet, we always say
that's a really good point, by the way. The minute you start feeling sorry for someone, that is much worse than being angry with them.
Yeah, and that's the feeling we felt with Grant Shapps yesterday when he sort of came in and as I said, how, you know, what do you think? And he goes, well, we've got to make sure we don't lose too badly. And you felt sorry for them briefly, just to say you're fighting a losing battle. I will say though about Rishi Sunak, Ed, we all say he's got terrible political skills. He's managed to become prime minister of the country. You know, for this man who seems to have no political touch whatsoever, how the hell is he prime minister?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to go back into the House of Commons when the election was called. Because, I mean, anyone can get this job these days.
Oh, Ed.
Would you have given up if you were still trying, though? I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? How would you be handling a campaign like this 3 weeks in that's going
well? That's
badly?
the other point. I mean, Asma was talking about, you know, who his advisors are. And I think one of the things that's beginning to worry me quite a lot is that Rishi is spending his time in what are nominally Tory safe seats. I mean, the subliminal message is going out that seats like Gillian Keegan's or whatever, could be potentially under threat. He should be in kind of marginal Labour seats. Well, maybe not, but you know the point I'm making. It's not a good look to be campaigning in Oxfordshire for seats which you expect to be rock solid Tory.
Yeah.